You know that feeling when something seems just a little bit off, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is, that unsettling sensation that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Well, imagine that feeling amplifying every single day for months until it drives you to tear apart the very walls of your home. Today, I am going to tell you about a man whose world was turned completely upside down when he made a discovery that defied all logic and reason, a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This is the story of Marcus Henderson, and what he found hidden inside the walls of the Grand Vista Hotel will challenge everything you think you know about reality itself. But before we dive into this mind-bending tale, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because stories like this don't come around every day. And trust me, you won't want to miss what is coming next. Marcus Henderson was what most people would call an ordinary man living an ordinary life. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at the Grand Vista Hotel in downtown Portland, a job he'd held for nearly 15 years. The Grand Vista wasn't just any hotel though. Built in 1923, it was one of those grand old establishments with ornate architecture, high ceilings and walls that seemed to whisper stories of decades past. Marcus knew every inch of that building, from the basement boiler room to the penthouse suites. He could navigate its maze like corridors blindfolded and identify any strange sound or smell that didn't belong. Marcus had been married to Olivia for 12 wonderful years. She was a kindergarten teacher with bright eyes and an infectious laugh that could light up any room. They lived in a modest apartment just 20 minutes from the hotel, and while they weren't wealthy, they were content. Olivia would often joke that Marcus loved that old hotel more than he loved her, which wasn't true, but he did have a deep appreciation for the building's history and character. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in March. Marcus arrived at work to find the overnight security guard, Jim, looking unusually shaken. Jim had been working nights at the Grand Vista for over a decade, and nothing typically rattled him. But that morning, his usually steady hands were trembling as he handed over the security log. Jim explained that throughout the night, he'd been hearing strange sounds coming from the walls on the third floor. Not the usual settling noises that old buildings make, but something different. Something that sounded almost like muffled voices or crying. He'd walked the halls multiple times, checking every room, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The sounds seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves. Marcus initially dismissed Jim's concerns as fatigue-induced paranoia. Night shifts could play tricks on anyone's mind, especially in a building as old as the Grand Vista. But as the days passed, more staff members began reporting similar experiences. Housekeeping staff mentioned hearing whispers in empty rooms. The front desk clerk swore she heard someone calling for help from the walls near the elevator bank. Even some guests began complaining about strange noises that kept them awake. What made these reports particularly unsettling was that they all seemed to be concentrated around the same area of the third floor. Rooms 314 through 318 were where most of the disturbances were reported. Marcus decided to investigate personally, spending several nights in the hotel to listen for these mysterious sounds himself. On his third night of investigation, Marcus finally heard them. It was around 2 in the morning when he detected what sounded like muffled sobbing coming from somewhere behind the wall between rooms 316 and 317. The sound was faint but unmistakably human. Someone was crying, and they seemed to be trapped inside the wall structure itself. Marcus immediately called Jim, and together they examined the wall more closely. Using his maintenance tools, Marcus tapped along the wall and discovered that there was indeed a hollow space behind what should have been solid construction. This discovery sent chills down his spine because he knew the building's blueprints by heart, and there was no indication of any hidden spaces or passages in that area. The following morning, Marcus approached the hotel manager about his findings. However, the manager was reluctant to authorize any invasive investigation that might damage the hotel's historic walls. The Grand Vista prided itself on preserving its original 1920s architecture, and any alterations required extensive paperwork and approval from the Historical Society. Frustrated, but determined, Marcus decided to conduct his own unofficial investigation. He began researching the hotel's history more thoroughly, spending hours at the local library and city records office. What he discovered made his blood run cold. In 1956, a young woman named Catherine Mills had disappeared from the Grand Vista Hotel. She had been staying in room 316, with her husband during their honeymoon. According to police reports, she had simply vanished without a trace one night while her husband slept. The husband claimed he woke up to find her gone, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. The case had remained unsolved for nearly 70 years. But that wasn't the only disappearance. Marcus found records of at least 4 other people who had gone missing from the Grand Vista over the decades, all from rooms on the 3rd floor. The most recent disappearance had occurred in 1987, involving a business traveler named Robert Chen, who had checked in but was never seen again. His belongings were found undisturbed in his room, but he had simply vanished. Armed with this disturbing historical information, Marcus became even more convinced that something sinister was hidden within those walls. The crying sounds continued nightly, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like scratching or tapping, as if someone was trying to communicate from inside the wall. Marcus tried to convince the hotel management to allow a proper investigation, but they remained resistant. The hotel's reputation and business depended on maintaining its mystique and charm, not becoming known as a place where people disappeared. They suggested that Marcus was letting his imagination run wild and that the sounds were likely just old pipes or settling foundation issues. Desperate and unable to ignore what he was hearing, Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He decided to investigate the wall himself, during his off hours, using his master key access to the hotel. He knew he was risking his job, but the crying sounds haunted him day and night. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything else. Late one Saturday night, when the hotel was particularly quiet, Marcus gathered his tools and headed to the 3rd floor. He had studied the building's structural plans and identified the safest place to make a small opening in the wall without compromising the building's integrity. His hands shook as he prepared to break through decades of plaster and wallpaper. The first few inches revealed the expected wooden framework and insulation typical of 1920s construction. But as Marcus continued carefully removing material, his flashlight beam illuminated something that made him stumble backward in shock. There, behind the wall, was a small hidden room, barely large enough for a person to stand in. And inside that room was a figure. Marcus's heart pounded as he widened the opening enough to shine his light more clearly into the hidden space. What he saw defied all logic and reason there. Sitting against the far wall of the tiny room was a woman. She appeared to be in her 20s with dark hair and wearing a dress that looked like it belonged to the 1950s. But what made Marcus's blood freeze wasn't just finding someone in the wall. It was the fact that he recognized her face immediately, even though the woman appeared young and unmarked by time. Marcus knew without a doubt that he was looking at his wife Olivia. The woman in the wall looked exactly like Olivia, but somehow different, younger, perhaps, or from a different time entirely. She sat motionless, her eyes closed, as if she were sleeping or in some kind of suspended state. Marcus called out to her, but she didn't respond. He reached through the opening to touch her, and she felt real, solid, but cold as ice. Marcus panicked. His mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. How could Olivia be inside the wall of the hotel when she was at home, presumably asleep in their bed? He fumbled for his phone and called their home number. Olivia answered on the 3rd ring, groggy and confused about why he was calling so late. The sound of Olivia's voice on the phone, while simultaneously seeing her sitting motionless in the wall, sent Marcus into a complete psychological tailspin. He ended the call abruptly and stared at the figure in the wall, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. As Marcus studied the woman more closely, he noticed details that both confirmed and contradicted his initial recognition. She had Olivia's exact facial features, her hair color, even a small scar on her chin that Olivia had gotten as a child. But her clothes were definitely from a different era, and there was something timeless and unsettling about her presence. Marcus spent the rest of the night sitting in the hallway, staring at the opening he had made, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. By morning, he had convinced himself that stress and lack of sleep had caused him to hallucinate. The crying sounds, the investigation, the pressure from work, it had all combined to make him see things that weren't really there. But when he looked through the opening again as dawn light filtered through the hotel windows, the woman was still there, still motionless, still looking exactly like his wife, still defying all explanation. Marcus carefully sealed up the wall opening and went home to Olivia. He watched her closely that morning, looking for any signs that she might somehow be connected to what he had found. But Olivia was completely normal, chatting about her weekend plans and complaining about a difficult student in her class. She seemed to have no knowledge of or connection to the mysterious figure in the wall. Over the following weeks, Marcus became increasingly obsessed with the discovery he would return to the hotel night after night, opening the wall just enough to check if the woman was still there. She never moved, never responded to his voice, never showed any signs of life beyond simply being present. Marcus began researching more intensively, looking for any explanation that might make sense of what he had found. He studied the disappearances more carefully and made a shocking discovery. In 1956, when Catherine Mills disappeared from room 316, the hotel had undergone renovation work. Specifically, they had sealed up several small storage spaces and servant passages that had been part of the original 1920s design. The renovation records showed that the work had been completed hastily and without proper inspection. Marcus began to suspect that Catherine Mills hadn't simply disappeared, but had somehow become trapped in the wall during the renovation work. But that still didn't explain why she looked exactly like his wife Olivia. Marcus's obsession began affecting his work performance and his relationship with Olivia. He became distant and preoccupied, unable to focus on anything except the mystery of the woman in the wall. Olivia noticed the change in his behavior and repeatedly asked what was wrong, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. How could he explain that he had found what appeared to be her trapped inside a hotel wall? The situation reached a breaking point when Marcus discovered something that shattered his already fragile understanding of reality. While going through old photographs from the hotel's archives, he found a picture from 1956 showing the hotel staff gathered for a group photo. There, standing among the employees, was the woman from the wall. The caption identified her as Catherine Mills, but she looked exactly like Olivia. Marcus stared at the photograph for hours, comparing it to pictures of his wife. The resemblance wasn't just striking, it was impossible. They were identical in every way, as if they were the same person separated by decades. This discovery led Marcus down an even darker path of investigation. He began researching his wife's family history, looking for any connection to the hotel or to Catherine Mills. What he found terrified him more than anything he had experienced so far. Olivia's maiden name was Mills. Her family had lived in Portland for generations, but there were gaps in the family tree that had never been fully explained. When Marcus confronted Olivia about her family history, she revealed something she had never mentioned before. Her grandmother had always told stories about a missing relative, a young woman who had disappeared in the 1950s under mysterious circumstances. The pieces began falling into place in a way that defied all logic. Somehow, Catherine Mills and Olivia were connected, possibly even the same person existing in different times. The implications of this realization drove Marcus to the edge of sanity. Marcus became convinced that the woman in the wall was somehow trapped between dimensions or time periods, and that his discovery of her was not coincidental but destined. He began spending entire nights at the hotel, talking to the motionless figure, trying to find a way to help her or understand what was happening. The hotel management finally noticed Marcus's erratic behavior and declining work performance. They confronted him about the unauthorized access to hotel areas and the mysterious damage to the wall in the third-floor corridor. Marcus was forced to reveal his discovery, knowing it would likely cost him his job. When hotel security and management investigated the wall opening, they found exactly what Marcus had described. The hidden room, the woman's body, everything was exactly as he had reported. But rather than being amazed or concerned, the hotel management seemed more worried about the potential scandal and liability. The discovery became a legal and media nightmare. Police were called in to investigate what appeared to be the decades-old remains of Catherine Mills. Medical examiners were baffled by the perfect preservation of the body and the impossible resemblance to Marcus's wife Olivia. DNA testing confirmed that the woman in the wall was indeed Catherine Mills, the honeymoon bride who had disappeared in 1956, but additional testing revealed something even more disturbing. The DNA also showed a familial connection to Olivia that was far closer than distant relatives should share. The investigation attracted national media attention, with paranormal researchers and scientists alike trying to explain the impossible preservation of the body and the uncanny resemblance to a woman born decades later. Some theorized about time loops or parallel dimensions, while others suggested elaborate hoaxes or genetic coincidences. For Marcus, the scientific explanations and media circus were secondary to a more personal horror. He had become convinced that finding Catherine Mills was somehow connected to his wife's fate. He began to fear that Olivia was destined to disappear into the hotel walls, just as Catherine had decades before. Marcus's fears seemed to be confirmed when Olivia began experiencing strange dreams and an inexplicable attraction to the Grand Vista Hotel. She started asking Marcus to bring her to see where he worked, something she had never shown interest in before. In her dreams, she described walking through corridors that matched the hotel's layout perfectly, despite never having been inside the building. The situation reached its climax when Olivia announced that she had booked a room at the Grand Vista for their upcoming anniversary. She said she wanted to stay in the hotel where Marcus worked, to better understand the place that had been such a big part of his life. When Marcus tried to dissuade her, Olivia became unusually insistent, almost as if she were compelled to stay at the hotel. Marcus realized with growing horror that history was repeating itself. Just as Catherine Mills had stayed at the hotel in 1956 with her husband and then disappeared, Olivia was now determined to spend the night in the same building where her mysterious doppelganger had been found trapped in the walls for nearly 70 years. The night Olivia checked into the Grand Vista was the longest of Marcus's life. He stayed awake all night, checking on her every few hours, terrified that she would somehow vanish, just as Catherine Mills had. But morning came, and Olivia was safe, confused by Marcus's paranoid behavior but otherwise unharmed. However, Marcus's relief was short-lived. When he went to check on the sealed wall where Catherine Mills had been found, he discovered that the hidden room was now empty. The body that had been preserved there for decades was gone, as if it had simply faded away. The disappearance of Catherine Mills' remains from the wall coincided with subtle changes in Olivia's behavior and appearance. She seemed more confident, more vibrant, as if some missing piece of herself had been restored. She also began having vivid memories of events she had never experienced, memories that matched details from Catherine Mills' life in the 1950s. Marcus realized that by finding Catherine Mills and bringing her story to light, he had somehow completed a supernatural cycle that had been interrupted for nearly 70 years. The woman trapped in the wall had finally been able to reunite with her future self, allowing both versions to exist as one complete person. The Grand Vista Hotel eventually embraced its supernatural reputation, marketing itself as a destination for paranormal enthusiasts and mystery lovers. The third floor, where Catherine Mills had been found, became the hotel's most requested area, with guests hoping to experience their own supernatural encounters. Marcus continued working at the hotel, but his relationship with the building had fundamentally changed. He could no longer walk the halls without remembering the terror and wonder of his discovery. Every strange sound, every unexplained shadow reminded him that reality was far more complex and mysterious than he had ever imagined. Olivia, now carrying the memories and experiences of both her present self and Catherine Mills from the 1950s, had become someone entirely new yet familiar. She remembered their life together as Marcus's wife, but also recalled being a young bride in 1956 who had somehow become lost between dimensions until her future husband found her and set her free. The story of Marcus Henderson and his impossible discovery serves as a reminder that the world around us holds mysteries that defy our understanding of time, space, and identity. The people we love most carry secrets that span decades, and sometimes finding the truth requires literally breaking down the walls that separate us from the impossible. What Marcus found in those hotel walls changed not only his life, but his entire understanding of what it means to be connected to another person across time itself. His wife had been waiting for him to find her for nearly 70 years, trapped in a space between moments, until love and determination finally brought them together in a way that transcended all logic and reason. And that is the incredible true story of the man who found his wife inside the hotel wall. If you enjoyed this mind-bending tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that explore the mysterious and unexplained. What do you think really happened at the Grand Vista Hotel? Was it supernatural? Or is there a scientific explanation we haven't considered yet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. and I'll see you in the next video.